This is the Digital Trust Podcast. In every episode, we strive to bring support to those of you who serve on the front lines and in the trenches of data and technology. We endeavor to bring understanding to the under-resourced and underappreciated, help remove your stress, and provide relief to your pain. Welcome to the Digital Trust Podcast. Sit down with us as we give you hard-hitting advisory conversations to help you build digital trust with your stakeholders and clients, and actionable takeaways to help you become a digitally trustworthy organization.
Welcome to the first episode of the Digital Trust Podcast. In the podcast that I recorded with co-host Dominic Vogel, we spent 4 years and just over 200 episodes exploring the question, why does cybersecurity matter? The consensus from our guests, with the exception of one, was that cybersecurity does indeed matter. While cybersecurity will continue to be a topic of discussion, in this podcast, we will be unpacking the subject of digital trust. Thank you once again for joining us on the Digital Trust Podcast. My name is Christian. I'm the host of the show. And joining me today, all the way from Berkeley, California, Mr. Bryan Lee. And he is the Principal Consultant and Privacy Officer at Privatus Consulting. Bryan, welcome.
Thank you, Christian. Just super happy to be here, especially when I've seen that list of distinguished people you've had on here before. I really feel honored to be included among it.
Well, you are certainly no exception to that, Bryan. In fact, why don't you tell us exactly how distinguished you are and tell us a bit of your backstory?
Sure. So as I mentioned to you earlier, I kind of got into privacy through the back door. I'm a career military officer. I was really involved in foreign affairs and foreign military intelligence. And through that work, I did a lot of work in analysis and kind of intelligence procedures and things of this nature. And I also ended up doing a lot of work in nuclear nonproliferation. If you can recall, we used to have a bunch of treaties with the Soviet Union and then Russia. When I retired from the government, I went to work for a university, and there was a lot of interest in trying to use social media and a lot of the online information that was around to try to enhance arms control procedures. So I ended up doing a lot of data analysis projects and things of this nature on behalf of the government. And one of those projects, there was a big conference at Stanford University, and you can imagine all the tech heads and everything there. And a company approached me and said, hey, we kind of like what you're saying. You want to come do that for us, data analysis company? I said, great. So I left the university, went to work for them for a couple of years. And their CEO was Michelle Dennedy, just I guess you could say an original gangster in the privacy space.
She's an OG. We had her on the show before as well, or on the previous podcast, I should say.
Yeah. Okay, great. So you've met Michelle, and you can see that she is an enthusiastic and knowledgeable person, and she just roped me in. And that company we were working for was a startup. It went the way of most startups. And Michelle said, come work with me together, and we'll create this privacy monster. So we've been working at it ever since. So
just another typical story. Run-of-the-mill background.
Doesn't everybody come to privacy that way? Yeah. So I should preface. Yeah, I preface. I'm not a lawyer, so anything I'm telling you, take with a grain of salt.
Legal disclaimer. Yeah, absolutely. So for those folks in the audience who don't really have a background in privacy, which is most, can you just define, Bryan, out of the gate here, what is privacy and why it's important?
Privacy is, it's important because most legal regimes recognize it now as a fundamental right. Okay, so it's like having the right to free speech or the right to being left alone is the famous legal stance in the United States many, many years ago looked at it. But why it's important is because we all live in the modern era, and there are data and information and pieces about you flying all over the place. And all of us have grown up in a world where we have an expectation that information that is personal is our information. It's not a business's information. And so privacy is important because it's this agreement between us and businesses that personal information is going to remain personal and be protected, and it's going to be treated in a manner that respects the right that we all have with regarding our personal information.
Beautifully said, beautifully said. So Bryan, tell us something that will bring the crew in this studio on the edge of their seat, and maybe even some of them onto their feet today. Tell us something about privacy that most people don't know.
Okay, here's something that most people don't know. Certainly for those of us who are European watchers, how much money in fines do you think the European Union has assessed so far for privacy violations?
Millions and millions. I have no idea.
Yeah. So at the latest count, the European Union has assessed over $4 billion with a B in privacy violation fines. I mean, we used to say that there's big business, and now we can say that privacy violations are apparently big business because these are companies that are being hammered. And of course, most of the ones who are getting assessed for those kind of fines are the companies you've heard of: Meta, Google,
Right.
Amazon. But there's a lot of small little companies in there too that you maybe haven't heard of. Maybe some of what we would call in Europe, they're often called family businesses. So they're kind of smaller and mid-sized businesses, and they get hit with fines also. Again, going back to what I said at the very beginning, all of these fines are related to a breach of trust between the person and the business's ultimate inability to respect that fundamental right of privacy.
It's funny that you used the word trust because that was what I was going to ask you next, Bryan. What is digital trust? Being that we're the Digital Trust podcast, what does it mean in your world? What are your views on digital trust?
I mean, I don't think digital trust is really that different from personal trust, right? I think we make a mistake when we start acting as if things are fundamentally changed because you go online. I mean, basically, if you walk into a store and decide you want to buy something, you have an expectation. And there's a whole concept in privacy about your expectations in terms of contextual circumstances. And so for me, digital trust is no different than what you would expect in interaction with any kind of business. You expect to be treated fairly. You expect to be respected in the interaction, and you expect that the information you are exchanging for them, whether it's a credit card number or your mailing address so you can get the item shipped, is going to be used for the purpose that you are sharing it for and not for some other purpose. And for me, all those kind of things go together, and that's what creates trust between you and a company.
I want to switch gears a little bit, still talking about trust and privacy, but how to do privacy in the real world in an organization right the first time. What is the best way to do privacy right the first time versus retroactively trying to fix something that wasn't done right at the beginning?
Yeah. So there are a couple ways to do it, and there's a famous kind of idea out there. It's something called privacy by design. And this is a Canadian concept, right? Dr. Ann Cavoukian came up with it many, many years ago. And the privacy by design concept just says that as you stand up either an app or a procedure that touches personal information, personal data, that from the get-go, you recognize that you want to be privacy preserving and privacy maintaining as you engage with that information. And so there are a lot of terms, you want to make it, it should be secure all the time. It should be proactive, not reactive. These are all kind of, I guess, sort of talking points. But fundamentally, what you want to do is, just as you said to begin this, is you don't want to wait till after the fact to consider privacy. You want to consider privacy at the front end. We have it at Privatus. We just use what we call the 4F approach, 4Fs. The first F is get a framework. There are a bazillion cybersecurity frameworks that have been adapted for privacy. And a framework, for those of you who aren't privacy fanatics or cybersecurity people, it's just a checklist put together by people who've really paid a lot of attention to this. And so there are many, many of them out there. Some are proprietary, some are free, but start with a framework. And all the framework is this is the checklist you need to be considered about. Second thing is look at your foundations. Your foundations are things like policies and people, right? So a foundation says, I've got a privacy policy, I posted it on my website, and I've got an internal policy that is corresponding to that, and our company is doing what it says it does. So that's the foundations. The next one is you want to have flows, workflows. So you don't want to have just kind of an ad hoc situation if one of these privacy relevant things happen. If you get a data breach, for example, and by the law there's 25 people you have to contact in the government and you got to notify all the customers who were breached, you don't want to be doing that on the fly, right? You should have a workflow in place and established, and you should have that kind of practice, and the people who are going to have to execute need to understand it. And then the last thing we preach in our 4F framework is you need to have feedback. You have to have some kind of whether you want to call them, KPIs, or whether you just want to have checkpoints to make sure that your procedures and policies are in place, they're being updated, they're being executed to a standard you expect, and you have some way of measuring how well your program is doing. So that's it, the 4 Fs.
We're running out of time, Bryan, but I have so many things that I want to talk to you about. I think what I'll go with here is implementing the 4 Fs. What's current state when you start a client engagement, when you're looking at a company's privacy program? What does immature state typically look like? And then can you just take us from there through the journey to what a mature state ends up looking like once they're where they need to be?
Sure. We use, the standard maturity model, which is out there. Everyone who's done anything having to do with software understands this. But, you kind of have a level 0, which is maybe unaware or have a vague notion that, privacy might be important. Level 1 is, it's important and you're trying to do something about it. So this might be, we've established a privacy program. We have someone we've, said, you're going to be our privacy gal, this kind of thing. Level 2 is where you start to have some procedures in place. So you might not have all the procedures you need. The procedures you have tend to be ad hoc and informal. Then you get into level 3, which is documented procedures. So now you're starting to actually write things down, and you have some repetition and some ability to repeat these procedures. Level 4 are documented and, I guess what you would call established. And then level 5 is, it's what they call the learning organization, right? Not only do you have it all documented, but you're constantly on the forefront of finding new things. So in terms of implementing, most places, most companies are probably level 1s or 2s. They're aware of privacy. They know it's something important, but they need help getting all those procedures and policies and things into place. And that's where that framework really helps you out, because the framework will allow you to do the gap analysis or the program assessment or whatever you want to call it. That just gives you sort of a starting point and says that these are all the things you have to do. And a lot of those frameworks will also say, in terms of risk, these are the ones that'll have the highest impact on your risk picture.
Final question, Bryan. How does privacy tie into what people may be maybe a little bit more naturally familiar with, which is IT and cybersecurity? Where's the overlap and the tie-in with those disciplines?
Yeah, so this is one of those philosophical questions that we should be drinking a beer and talking about. But there's this great analogy, right? You can have, how do they say it? You can have security without privacy, but you can't have privacy without security. And it's the same question just came up. I was having dinner the other night, and we were drinking beer. And I thought about it like this. Picture a transparent, like an acrylic box with a lock, okay? And you can take a picture of yourself in your underwear and put it inside that box and put the lock on it. Now that picture is now secure, but it's no longer private, right? Because the box is transparent, I can see through it. So you need to have both of these things together. So in order to have privacy and security, you might want to, if you had an opaque box, now you would have both. So that's the idea. They work hand in hand. They're a little bit different concepts. Security is more interested in protecting data as a whole. Privacy is really zeroed in on that personally identifiable information, but you can't have one without the other.
So that wraps it up for today, Bryan. We're going to have to end it there, and it's regrettable because I want to keep talking to you, but I appreciate you sharing your privacy wisdom with us and with the viewers and listeners, and to you, the viewer and listener. I appreciate you joining us in the conversation as well. We'll see you all on the next episode of the Digital Trust Podcast.
Thanks for joining us today on the Digital Trust Podcast. If you found this conversation helpful, please share it with someone you care about. And if you'd like to receive our monthly newsletter, please click the link in the description to subscribe. And to put your mind at ease, our newsletter will include episode summaries with key points and actionable takeaways, plus a heads up on the upcoming episode guests. Rest assured, it won't be a spammy sales message, and we will never sell or share your information. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you on the next episode.